Okay, so in the last assignment, you had to read through the text Conformity and decide what text structure the author was using in order to develop his central idea. And once you figured out the text structure, you were to create the graphic organizer and put in the supporting details of each paragraph. So let's go through this text um, and see what you have so far. So let's look at the first paragraph. Make sure that you have your text out. Make sure that you have your conformity text structure analyzation worksheet out. And make sure you have your new worksheet on conformity to help answer your questions. So we read this text in order to determine how an author develops a central idea about conformity to build our understanding about what makes people follow a crowd. In the first paragraph, the author writes, conformity, or acting the way most other people in one's social group act, often grows out of a person's desire for security and belonging in a group. Usually a group of similar age, culture, religion, or educational background. Being different from the group carries the risk of social rejection, a deep fear of many people. The drive to conform is often particularly powerful for adolescents, for whom acceptance by peers can be a primary goal, but it affects people of all ages. However, some studies suggest that conformity decreases with age. So in class, we decided that this was a description paragraph. So we circled description, and then we pulled up our description graphic organizer, which had a circle in the middle, and we wrote the word conformity. And then in each circle outside the main topic, we wrote a different detail. So if we look back at the paragraph, our topic sentence or main idea is that conformity, or acting the way most other people in one's social group act, often grows out of a person's desire for security and belonging in a group. And then the author goes on to give us more details about conformity. Okay, so it's usually in a group of similar age, culture, religion, or educational background. That would be a supporting detail. Being from a different group carries the risk of social rejection, that people fear social rejection, that the drive is powerful for adolescents, and that adolescents' primary goal is acceptance by their peers. Another detail would be that it affects people of all ages, and also that conformity decreases with age. So all of those different details you could put in your different circles that are surrounding the main idea of your description paragraph. So let's move on to paragraph 2. Oh, before we move on to paragraph 2, pull out your worksheet and define conformity in your own words. When you're defining conformity in your own words, look at your main idea and your topic sentence from paragraph 1. So go ahead and pause the video and answer question number 1 on this worksheet. Now let's move on to paragraph number 2. Although the word often has a negative connotation, conformity is not necessarily a bad thing. People's tendencies to conform help society function smoothly in many ways. For example, when drivers follow the rules of the road, it enables safe transportation. If the members of a team conform to the norms of interpersonal interaction, They enable effective communication and collaboration. So, what the author is doing right now, we'll look at the topic sentence. Although the word often has a negative connotation, conformity is not necessarily a bad thing. So, the author is telling us that when we use the word conformity, we tend to think of it being negative. When we think of peer pressure, we think about how students are trying to make, or peers are trying to make you do something that you don't want to do. But conformity is not necessarily a bad thing. So he's saying that all conformity isn't negative, that there are ways that people that can conform that help society function better. Um, so then he goes on to say people's tendency to conform helps society function smoothly in many ways. So he's adding to his idea that it's not a bad thing, and now saying that it can be a good thing. And then he follows up with two examples. Now, these two examples are written in um, cause and effect. So, for example, when drivers follow the rules of the road, it enables safe transportation. So the effect is safe transportation. What causes that effect is when drivers follow the rules of the road. So following the rules of the road is your conformity, conforming to our laws of driving helps us have safe transportation. That's your cause and effect statement. Then he follows that up with another cause and effect statement. Okay, the effect is the effect of communication and collaboration. What causes that effect is if members of a team conform to the norms of interpersonal interaction. So the author here is developing his central idea um, about conformity using a cause and effect paragraph. So, our two causes and two effects in this paragraph to show how conformity is not necessarily a bad thing, that it is actually a good thing. So, for paragraph number 2, you should circle cause and effect. Okay, and then you should draw your arrow graphic organizer with the explosion. And in the arrow and the explosion, you should write one of these two examples of cause and effect in in these two sentences right here. So make sure you've done that. If you have not, pause the video and complete that. Now let's look at question number 2 here. What are some examples of how conformity helps society function smoothly? We see that here in paragraph 2 with these two examples. So pick one of these examples and write it right here to explain what are some examples of how conformity helps society function smoothly. So now let's pause the video and make sure you have that completed. Now let's look at paragraph number 3. Psychologist Herbert Kellman identified and labeled 3 major types of conformity. So our topic sentence is about 3 major types of conformity. It tells us who identified them and who labeled them. But what this paragraph is going to talk about is the 3 major types of conformity. The first is compliance. Compliance occurs when a person conforms publicly but privately keeps his or her own original beliefs. People comply because of a need for approval from others and a fear of rejection. So there's the author is describing the first type of compliance. Now let's look at the next sentence. The second identification is conforming to a particular person whom one respects, such as a friend or family member. Identification is usually motivated by the role model's perceived attractiveness or success. So here the author is describing the second type of identification, or the second type of conformity, which is called identification. All right. And then the author goes on to explain the third type of conformity. He writes the third type of conformity, internalization, is when a person has actually absorbed a group's belief system and sees it as truly their own, both publicly and privately. This is the most profound type of conformity and is likely to stay with people for a long time. So many students look at this, and the first thing they see is first, second, and third, and then assume that this is a sequence paragraph. And I can understand why we would think that this might be sequence, because it uses those keywords first, second, and third. The problem with that is with sequence and chronological order, that means that this needs to be the first thing that happens. This needs to mean the second thing that happens, and this would need to be the third thing that happens. And that means that those three things have to happen in that order. And that's not what the author is talking about here. He's not describing something that happens in order. He's just talking about the three major types of conformity. And so he uses these words just to say, here's one type of conformity, it's compliance. Here's another type of conformity, it's identification. And here's another type of conformity, it's internalization. And then he describes each one of those types of conformity. So this, in fact, ends up being a description paragraph. Okay, so when we go back to our graphic organizers for our text structure, we're going to take paragraph 3 and label it description. So you need to use your description graphic organizer with the circle in the middle. The circle in the middle should say 3 types of conformity. And then you should have 3 circles on the outside, and inside each of those circles, you need to write one of the 3 types of conformity. And those 3 types, as you can see right here, are compliance, identification, and internalization. So once you have your graphic organizer filled out, pause the video if you need to get that finished. Then I want you to go over to your other worksheet, and I want you to list and explain the 3 types of conformity. And those answers are right here. Here's your first type of conformity, here's the second type of conformity, and here's your third type of conformity. So pause the video and write out your 3 types of conformity on that worksheet. All right, so moving on to paragraph number 4. The author writes, the strong force of conformity is well documented in psychological research. This is our topic sentence. So when we look at this, we're talking about conformity again, but what more specifically about conformity are we talking about? Well, we're talking about the psychological research, and specifically the documented psychological research. So he's going to describe in this paragraph what psychological research has been done. So he goes on to say, in 1936, a researcher named Sharif, I can't pronounce that first name, hypothesized that people would change their opinions about something in order to conform to a larger group, even if they were among strangers. To test this hypothesis, he designed an experiment which made use of an autokinetic effect. So again, these are supporting details, okay? We're talking about psychological research. So to get more specific, he talks about this researcher's hypothesis, okay? And that he designed an experiment to test that hypothesis. So he's describing one documented psychological research in the remainder of this paragraph. So again, we're looking at a description paragraph. So go back to your text analyzation. and we're going to go to paragraph number 4, and we're going to circle description. In the center circle, we're going to look at our topic sentence and what is the main idea of our topic sentence, or what is the topic sentence, what is the topic of this paragraph, and that's going to be your psychological research. Okay, and then in your bubble surrounding psychological research, you're going to say that people would conform even if they were among strangers. So he describes his hypothesis, and then you're going to put that he designed an experiment with the autokinetic effect. So you're only going to have 2 bubbles surrounding your topic for this description paragraph. So go make sure that you have your bubbles filled out properly with your description, for your description graphic organizer in this box. Pause the video if you need to. Okay, so let's move on to paragraph 5. The autokinetic effect is caused by fast small movements in our eyes that happen as we look at a particular object. When a person is placed in a dark room that contains only a single small stationary pinpoint of light, these eye movements produce an unusual effect. They make the point of light appear to move. Okay, so this paragraph can kind of go one of 2 ways. All right, so the topic sentence, the autokinetic effect is caused by fast, small movements of our eyes that happen as we look at a particular object. So he is describing in this sentence the autokinetic effect, but in order to describe the autokinetic effect, he has to use cause and effect sentence structures. So the best would be to use this as a cause and effect paragraph. Okay, the autokinetic effect is caused, okay, there's your key word, by fast small movements of our eyes that happen as we look at a particular object. Okay, so we're going to label this a cause and effect paragraph. All right, your effect is the autokinetic effect. Your cause is when our eyes look at a particular object. Okay, and then he goes on to be more specific for his experiment. Okay, when a person is placed in a dark room that contains only a single stationary pinpoint of light, okay, there's why something happens. Okay, so this is the cause, and then what happens is the eye movements produce an unusual effect. Okay, they make the point of light appear to move. So here is your effect. They make the point of light appear to move. So your cause is the dark room with a single stationary pinpoint of light, and your effect is the point of light appears to move. So your best answer for this paragraph is a cause and effect paragraph. Every sentence in this paragraph has cause and effect in it. So go back to your analyzation for text structure, draw your arrow with your explosion, and put in your cause statement in the arrow and your effect statement in the explosion. Remember, get that from this paragraph. Pause the video if you need to complete this. All right, so let's move on to paragraph 6. In Sharif's experiment, he placed several people in a dark room, one at a time, and asked them to stare at a dot of light 15 feet away. They were then asked to estimate the amount of which the dot of light moved, although it actually did not move at all. On that first day, each person saw different degrees of movement. Sometimes their answers varied by as much as 3 inches. Sharif then had the subjects return each day for 3 more days to repeat the experiment. However, on the second, third, and fourth days, he would put 3 people in a room together to observe the dot and give their answers. So let's look at this paragraph. Sharif, this paragraph is talking about Sharif's experiment, okay, and how he did this experiment. So he placed several people in a dark room, one at a time, and asked them to stare at a small dot of light 15 feet away. Then they were then asked to estimate the amount of light. So when we see this word then, that starts to think to me that then kind of means next, or the next thing he did. And I start to wonder if he is describing the steps to his experiment, because we know experiments have steps, and we know that those steps for an experiment have to be followed in a certain order. So that's where I start to think that this has got to be a chronological order, or the sequence in which he followed for his experiment. Um, so then I keep reading. So on the first day, each person saw different degrees of movement. Sometimes their answers varied by as much as 3 inches. Sharif then had the subjects return each day for 3 more days to repeat the experiment. So now we've got 3 return each day for 3 more days. So that's something that has to happen in a sequence. Those 3 days, those steps have to happen for day 1, day 2, and day 3. And then the same thing happens here. He's talking about on the second, third, and fourth days. So what happens on those days? So that tells me that this is a sequence, order and sequence, the order that he did in his experiment. So let's go back to your analyzation and go down to your next paragraph, your next box, and we're going to label this sequence. And then you're going to put in your number line, or your chronological order line, and then you're going to tell me the steps to his experiment. So you're going to start out with, he asked people to stare at a small dot in a dark room by themselves. They had to guess, or they had to estimate how much the dot of light moved. And then the second thing he did is he had them do the same thing, only instead of being alone, they were in there with other people. Okay, and then he repeated that a third and fourth time. So go back, fill in the sequence of how Sharif did his experiment. Pause the video if you need to in order to fill in your graphic organizer for chronological order and sequence for paragraph 6. All right, so now that we've completed paragraphs 5 and 6, let's move on to question number 4. When Sharif asked his subjects how much the dot moved, what was the correct answer? So go ahead and fill in what was the correct answer. How much did the dot actually move? Okay, so now let's go to paragraph 7. Sharif observed that over the course of the 3 trials in which the subjects sat together, their answers became more and more similar. On the final day, their answers settled around a common norm. See the graphic below. Sharif concluded that this experiment demonstrated the way a norm developed in society and how people tend to give up their individuality in order to conform to that norm. Few people desire to be an outlier whose opinion differs widely from what is typically in the group. So in paragraph 7, the author is describing what Sharif observed in the 3 trials in which the subjects sat together. And he's describing it as that their answers became more and more similar. And then it goes to tell us how they became similar from one day to the next day. So on the final day, so your paragraph, this paragraph is again a description paragraph. It is describing Sharif's observations of the experiment. So let's go and put in your graphic organizer, the circle in the middle, and the main idea or the topic is the observations of the experiment. So then in each bubble out here, we're going to put a supporting detail to the observations. So on the final, your supporting details are going to be in the rest of the paragraph. So on the final day, their answers settled around a common norm. So they all came together on the final day. Okay. Another detail is that he concluded the experiment demonstrated the way a norm develops in society. So this is showing how a norm develops in society. And how people tend to give up their individuality. So another detail is this is how people give up their individuality. And then the fact that few people desire to be an outlier. But you can see down here in this chart, on the first day when people were separated, they were estimating the movement of the dot. Their answers were very different from each other. And then on the second day, that when they were put together, their answers became more similar. On the third day, their answers became even more similar. And then on the fourth day, their answers were really close together. So these 3 people, when put together, their answers over time became the same thing. Now, look at how interesting this is. Person number 1 first thought that the dot moved 3.5 inches. And then by the end of this experiment, he is saying it's only moving 1 inch. And the only thing that's changed about this experiment is that other people have been added to the group when they're answering, and he's hearing other people's answers. So let's see, yes, we have a question right here. So how did the subjects in Sharif's experiment demonstrate conformity? Well, we see that in this chart right here, and we also see that in this paragraph, because on the final day, the fourth day, the final day, their answers settled around a common norm. So their answers kept growing closer and closer together. All right, so pause the video and finish answering your question right here, question number 5. All right, so let's look at our last paragraph. Researchers have also explored the dark side of conformity. Here's our topic sentence. Okay, our topic sentence is about the dark side of conformity. The need to be accepted and the fear of punishment for deviating from group norms can, in many ways, impel people to adopt negative attitudes or behaviors. A phenomenon called the spiral of silence can occur when one opinion becomes entirely socially dominant because those with other opinions are afraid to speak out. Human history is rife with examples of the destructive power of mass conformity. All right, so researchers have explored the dark side of conformity. So this is your topic sentence. The rest of the paragraph is going to be about the dark side of conformity. Um, the need to be accepted and the fear of punishment for deviating from group norms can, in many ways, push people to adopt negative attitudes or behaviors. Okay, so what happens? People adopt negative attitudes or behaviors. Why does that happen? Because of the fear of punishment for deviating from group norms. So we have, again, a cause and effect structure here in this sentence. Okay, the effect is people adopt negative attitudes or behaviors. The cause of that is their fear of punishment. So we again see a cause and effect structure right here. So let's go and put in our arrow and our explosion and write in the cause and the effect in this paragraph. A phenomenon called the spiral of silence can occur when one opinion becomes entirely socially dominant because those with other opinions are afraid to speak out. We have another cause and effect, okay? The effect is the phenomenon called the spiral of silence. So the spiral of silence is the effect. What causes the spiral of silence? Okay, that is when one opinion becomes entirely social dominant because others with differing opinions are afraid to speak out. And he goes on to say, human history is rife with examples of the destructive power of mass conformity. So this is just a conclusion sentence saying that history has several examples of where conformity has become a destructive power. So let's go make sure that you have your cause and effect graphic organizer. Make sure you have your cause and effect organizer drawn and put your cause and effect in, and then go to your other paragraph, and I want you to answer the question, what is one example of conformity making things worse in society? Think of your own answer, not one from the text. So think of a time maybe in history or in society today where you see people are conforming to something negative that is making society worse.